Hello again, dreamers. We wrapped up the story of Christian Gerhartsreiter in 2 parts, though I think I should have made it 3 parts since part 2 ran kind of long. But anyway, this bonus episode is additional content from the court documents related to that case that I did not include in the episode, which gives a pretty good timeline of Christian's time in the United States and his movements and activities over the years. While some of the information may be a bit repetitive, there are many details that came out in court that were not included in the main episode on this case. So if you're interested in hearing a synopsis of the timeline of Christian's cons and crimes, then keep listening, and if not, then carry on. All of this information is from Christian's October 2015 appeal of his conviction, which included the claim that there was insufficient evidence that the murder he was convicted of was premeditated, as he was convicted of first-degree murder with the enhancement that he used 2 deadly weapons shouldn't have been imposed, and that the credits for time served at the time of his conviction had not been properly calculated. I did read the first part of this towards the end of episode 176. It said, "The record reads like Pulp Fiction, but it tells the tragically true story of Christian's brutal murder of his neighbor and the tangled web of deceit by which he avoided arrest for 26 years. Christian lived a life of elaborate lies and many different identities both before and after the murder of John Soes. He was a chameleon-like social climber who at various times claimed to hobnob with celebrities like George Lucas, to be an English baron, and to be a member of the Rockefeller family. The prosecution introduced a great deal of evidence of Christian's various alter egos, calling numerous witnesses to testify at length about his many personas and sophisticated techniques to cover his tracks and conceal his true identity." Christian grew up in Bavaria, Germany, in a blue-collar family. He left Germany for the United States when he was 17 in 1978 as a foreign exchange student on a visa. He attended his senior year of high school in Berlin, Connecticut, and lived with the Savio family. Edward Savio, the son of the host family, attended high school with the defendant, and the two became friends. According to Edward, even as a youth, Christian told a lot of quote-unquote stories, often varied his speech and accents, and acted differently depending on the person with whom he was socializing. Christian told Edward that he came from a wealthy family and that his father was a quote-unquote industrialist. During this time with the Savio family, Christian generally used his real name, but he also went by Christopher Kenneth Gerhardt. Following high school, Christian attended the University of Wisconsin. He registered using his real name. He met Elaine Siskoff in 1980, introducing himself as Christopher Gerhardt. He also went by Christopher Gerhartsreiter Chichester, telling Miss Siskoff that Chichester was a family name. They dated from the fall of 1980 to the spring of 1981, when the defendant left the university, telling Miss Siskoff that he was going to California to pursue an internship with the film director George Lucas. She only heard from Christian once after he left for California. He sent her a postcard saying he was in England. The card appeared to bear a Great Britain postmark dated January 23, 1982. However, Christian was not in England. In 1981, after leaving Wisconsin, he rented Ruth Soe's guest house on the property that she owned at 1920 Lorraine Road in San Marino, California. Miss Soes lived in the property's main house. Christian was going by the name Christopher Chichester at the time. Christian became a parishioner at the Church of Our Savior in San Gabriel and made a number of acquaintances there, representing that he was a film student at the University of Southern California, or USC. Christian talked about using the name Chris Crow to work as a screenplay writer. Diane Farrar met Christian in 1984. Ms. Farrar studied journalism at USC. Her aunt, a San Marino resident, introduced her to Christian, thinking that he could help Ms. Farrar's boyfriend get into school at USC. Christian introduced himself as Christopher Chichester, the 13th Baronet. He told Miss Farrar that he was from South Africa, and he gave her a business card with that false name and a crest on it. He portrayed himself as wealthy. During the same period of time, Christian told others that he was British and that he ran the Chichester Family Trust. John Sues was Ruth Sue's adult son. He married Linda Mayfield in 1983, and by all accounts, they had a happy relationship. Following their marriage, they moved into the main house with John's mother because they were going through an economic slump. At the time, Christian was still living in the guest house on the property. Linda told a neighbor that she and her husband did not talk to Christian because he was kind of a creep. Things soon started to turn around for the couple, and Linda, who was trying to make her way as an artist, began to experience some success. In January of 1985, she had an art show and sold some of her pieces. The couple also bought a new pickup truck. In late January of 1985, the couple visited with John's longtime friend, Patrick Reyerman, and they told him they intended to move but wanted to stay nearby given the advancing age of John's mother. Mr. Reyerman did not sense any stress or conflict between John and Linda. After this visit, Mr. Reyerman never heard from them again. In late January, early February of 1985, the couple went to Susan Kaufman's home to show her their new pickup truck. Linda and Ms. Kaufman were longtime friends. The couple told Ms. Kaufman that they were planning to move. They appeared happy and discussed attending a science fiction convention with Ms. Kaufman in March. 2 weeks later, Linda called Ms. Kaufman and told her that she and her husband were going on a trip to New York. When Ms. Kaufman asked why, Linda told her, "Well, John's got a job with the government and I can't talk too much about it. I can't say much of anything, but we are going, and they might want me too." When Ms. Kaufman reminded Linda about the science fiction convention that they had planned to attend together, Linda said that they would be back in 2 weeks to get all of our stuff and pack everything up, and it would be in time to attend the convention. But after this conversation, Ms. Kaufman never heard from either John or Linda ever again, except for a single postcard that she received. Before this last conversation with her old friend, she had never heard Linda mention government work. In late January, early February of 1985, Linda had a telephone conversation with Gary Travis, who had purchased some of her art. She told Mr. Travis that she and her husband were traveling to New York because they had both accepted top-secret government jobs working with satellites. She promised to contact him once they were in New York. Linda visited her mother on February 8, 1985, and told her that she and John were leaving town for 2 weeks to see about a job opportunity for John in Connecticut working with computers. Linda asked if she could park their truck at her mother's house during the trip, but her mother said no because she didn't want to have to move the truck on street sweeping days. Linda made plans to see the play Cats upon her return, but Linda's mother never heard from her again. Linda worked at a bookstore. She was a pleasant and reliable employee. In late January, early February of 1985, her boss, Lydia Morano, asked her to open the store for the next few days. When Ms. Morano stopped by the store on one of those days, she found that it was closed. She was surprised because Linda was so reliable. Ms. Morano never spoke with or saw Linda ever again. Days before Ms. Morano had asked Linda to open the store, Linda told her that she and her husband were going on a top-secret mission. In March of 1985, Linda's sister discovered that Linda had never retrieved her cats from the kennel where she had been boarding them. Linda loved her cats. They were like her children. Therefore, her sister suspected that something was wrong and made a missing persons report on April 8, 1985. In May of 1985, Linda's mother received a postcard purportedly from Linda. It was postmarked April 29, 1985, from France. The postcard simply read, "Mom, I think we need a geography lesson, but not too bad. John and Linda." Her mother understood this card to mean that John and Linda had traveled to France rather than Connecticut. The card was out of character for Linda. Ordinarily, she would have more to say to her mother about her trip. Moreover, Linda had never mentioned plans to travel to Europe and did not have a passport or the financial means to make such a trip. DNA found on the postcard stamp contained 2 profiles, one of an unknown man, which was not either John or Christian. There was insufficient DNA information to identify the other contributor or to exclude Linda as a contributor. Ms. Kaufman also received a postcard purporting to be from Linda, also postmarked in France on April 29, 1985. The postcard read, "Hi Sue, kind of miss New York. Oops, but this can be lived with. John and Linda." Ms. Kaufman believed the postcard's brevity was out of character for her friend, who she believed would have told her why she was in France. Ms. Kaufman was also surprised because Linda never mentioned plans to travel overseas, and she and her husband did not have the financial resources to do so. DNA from the stamp came from an unknown male. John and Christian were excluded as possible donors. Linda's employer, Ms. Morano, also received a postcard from France, which stated, "Hi Lydia, not quite New York, but not bad. See you later, Linda and John." Ms. Morano was perplexed by the postcard because Linda did not have the money to travel to France and never mentioned any plans to travel there. Ms. Morano received a phone call from the May Company sometime over the years between 1985 and 1994 asking for a job reference for Linda Mayfield, and she received a call asking for a credit reference for Linda. Ms. Morano couldn't believe that she would receive these calls asking for positive references since Linda had abandoned her job and left her in the lurch. Following their disappearance, John's mother kept their room intact. There was no indication that the couple had packed for a long trip. John's insulin for his diabetes and medical supplies were still in the couple's bedroom. All of their possessions, including Linda's art and art supplies, were still at home. John's mother eventually placed her home on the market in November of 1985. Near the time of John and Linda's disappearance, Christian asked one of his acquaintances from church where he could dispose of some drums of chemicals. The acquaintance assumed that the defendant wanted to dispose of photography chemicals related to his studies at USC and told him there were plenty of places in the Angeles and San Bernardino National Forests. A week or 2 after this conversation, Christian offered to sell a few items to this same acquaintance. One of the items was an oriental rug. When the acquaintance's wife inspected the rug, she noticed a blood stain. She told Christian that there's spots on this rug. There's a blood spot on there. Christian did not deny that the stain was a blood stain. He simply rolled up the rug and put it back in the truck that he was driving. In the early spring of 1985, a neighbor of the So's family noticed a foul, awful smell and black smoke coming from the chimney of the guest house. When the neighbor called Christian to complain about the odor and asked what he was burning, Christian said he was burning a carpet. The neighbor cautioned Christian that he was considering calling the fire department, and the burning stopped 10 minutes later. In the spring of 1985, Christian let Jeffrey Bender, a graduate student at USC's film school, borrow John's truck. Mr. Bender used the truck for a couple of months until April or May of 1985. He returned the truck to Christian after he demanded payment for its use, even though they had never discussed Mr. Bender paying to use the truck. Christian never told Mr. Bender that the truck belonged to someone else. Between mid-May and June of 1985, Dana Farrar, whose aunt had introduced her to Christian in 1984, attended a social event at Christian's house. Christian walked freely into the main house to get supplies for the gathering. When Ms. Farrar asked why he was entering his landlord's home, Christian responded, "They are away. They will not mind." And Ms. Farrar also noticed a bare patch of earth behind the guest house, which had recently been dug up. The area was near a concrete slab, and it was 2 to 3 feet wide and 5 to 8 feet long. Ms. Farrar asked Christian about the dirt, and he had said that he had been having plumbing problems. After this party, Ms. Farrar never saw Christian again. On April 8, 1985, San Marino police officer Thomas Levesque took the missing persons report from Linda's sister. Officer Levesque did a record search in various databases for John and Linda and only found the Lorraine Road address associated with them. That's Dee Dee's home in San Marino. He visited 1920 Lorraine Road and spoke to John's mother, who was alone at the property. On April 16, 1985, Officer George Yankovic visited Lorraine Road and knocked on the door of the guest house. Christian answered the door naked. When Officer Yankovic asked him to put on some clothes, Christian refused, telling the officer that he was a nudist. He said his name was Christopher Chichester. When Officer Yankovic returned to the station, he ran a check on Christian in the California Law Enforcement Telecommunications System, or the CLETS database. He discovered that he had a California driver's license under the name of Christopher Chichester and also had an AKA of Christian Gerhartsreiter listed with the DMV. In July of 1985, San Marino police officer Lily Hadesell conducted a CLETS search for John and Linda's 1985 Nissan truck. The truck was still registered to Linda at the Lorraine Road address. Officer Hadesell flagged the car in the system, noting that it was connected to a missing person. In May of 1985, Christian told one of his acquaintances from church, William Stewart, that he was returning home to Connecticut because of a family problem. Mr. Stewart replied that he also planned to travel back east, but Christian refused to share any East Coast contact information with him. Christian borrowed a chainsaw from Mr. Stewart in late 1985 and returned it shortly after this conversation in May of 1985. Mr. Stewart never heard from Christian again. Christian applied for a post office box in Greenwich, Connecticut on June 12, 1985, using a driver's license in the name of Christopher Crow. The driver's license identified Christian's address as 34 Rock Ridge Road in Greenwich. Christian specified that C. Mountbatten as an additional authorized user of this post office box. He regularly used the box from 1985 until 1988, but stopped paying for it in February of 1989. The chainsaw was eventually turned over to police after the discovery of John's body. There was no evidence at trial that the chainsaw was used to dismember John. Nevertheless, the prosecutor represented, and the trial court agreed, the chainsaw evidence was relevant to show that at the time that these actions were all occurring in 1985, the defendant's mental state was such that he was trying to figure out how to dispose of things such as bodies by asking about drums of chemicals, by borrowing chainsaws, which he normally wouldn't use in his normal habits and customs. In fact, witnesses testified that they never saw Christian operating power tools or doing any sort of physical labor, not even gardening. So you see, I told you this guy was lazy. He doesn't even want to do anything. All he does is pretend to be something that he's not, and he goes around sponging off women his entire adult life. Anyway, between 1985 and 1998, Christian held a number of jobs in Connecticut and New York, working under the name Christopher Crow. He disposed of John and Linda's truck by giving it to an acquaintance, Chris Bishop, who attempted but was unable to register the truck because it had a lien on it. Mr. Bishop abandoned the truck because he was unable to obtain the title to it. Christian started a romantic relationship with a coworker, Mihoko Manabe, and moved into her Manhattan apartment. After the police initially investigated John and Linda's disappearance, the case went cold. In the fall of 1988, Officer Yankovic had been promoted to detective and decided to reopen the investigation. Detective Yankovic conducted a CLETS search for the couple's truck and discovered the truck was associated with the Bishop family in Greenwich, Connecticut. Detective Yankovic contacted the Greenwich Police Department and asked Detective Daniel Allen to follow up with the Bishops. He also informed Detective Allen that the San Marino Police Department were looking for a person going by the name of Chichester or Gerhartsreiter. In early November 1988, Detective Allen drove to the Bishop family home and spoke with Chris Bishop. He told Mr. Bishop that he was looking for a specific truck and that the truck was associated with the missing persons report. Mr. Bishop stated that his friend, Chris Crow, owned such a truck and provided Detective Allen with an address. After Detective Allen's visit, Christian called Mr. Bishop and asked him what was going on. Mr. Bishop told the defendant, "What's going on is a detective just showed up at my house and said you're wanted for a missing person investigation. That's what's up. Who the fuck are you, really?" Christian responded, "I gotta go," and he hung up the phone. Mr. Bishop did not hear from Christian ever again. In mid-November 1988, Detective Allen discovered a post office box registered to Christopher Crow. Detective Allen was also able to identify Christian's employers. He contacted Christian's current employer, Ralph Boynton, at Kidder Peabody, an investment firm on Wall Street in New York City. Mr. Boynton provided Detective Allen with 3 phone numbers for Christian. Detective Allen told Mr. Boynton that he was interested in meeting with Christian. Mr. Boynton arranged a meeting, telling Christian to come to his office at 6 a.m. Mr. Boynton did not tell Christian that Detective Allen would be attending the meeting. Nevertheless, Christian did not show up. Mr. Boynton arranged 2 other meetings, but Christian failed to show up for both meetings. Christian explained that he was worried about his parents being kidnapped by a foreign entity. Christian never showed up for work again. One of the phone numbers Mr. Boynton gave to Detective Allen was for Christian's girlfriend, Mihoko Manabe. In late November 1988, Detective Allen called Miss Manabe's home and asked to speak with Christopher Crow. Miss Manabe took a message and gave it to Christian. Christian then told her to not disclose his whereabouts, that Detective Allen was not a real police officer, and that his life and the lives of his parents were in danger. He asked Miss Manabe to marry him and to go into hiding with him in Europe. She agreed to go along with this plan because she was in love with him. In November of 1988, Christian informed the Greenwich Post Office that he would be closing his P.O. box as well as to pick up his remaining mail. Detective Allen informed Detective Yankovic that he was unable to make contact with Christian. Detective Yankovic did not ask Detective Allen to make any further efforts, so Detective Allen treated the case as closed. According to Ms. Manabe, Christian decided not to flee to Europe. Instead, he changed his appearance, he wore contact lenses, and he changed his hair color. He engaged in paranoid behavior. He left his job and refused to be seen in public with Ms. Manabe. He stopped driving. He never filled out official documents with his name. He shredded the couple's garbage and disposed of it in public places. All of their bills, leases, and accounts were placed into Miss Manabe's name only. Christian then received secondary credit cards on Miss Manabe's accounts in the name of Clark Rockefeller, a name he started using in the summer of 1989. This behavior continued until the couple ended their relationship in 1994. Dreamers, if you recall that this is a more than 4-year period when Christian stayed completely off the grid as a result of that call from police, and it was during this time he was becoming abusive and controlling towards Mihoko until she finally moved out. It was after that 4-year period that he finally emerged as Clark Rockefeller. Robert Parada purchased the Lorraine Road property from Ruth Soes in December of 1985. On May 4th, 1994, excavation contractors Jose Perez and his father and his brother were digging a swimming pool at the Lorraine Road property. When Mr. Perez was digging with a bobcat, he hit and broke a large fiberglass container about 2 to 3 feet underground, no more than a meter. There were several trash bags inside the container. Mr. Perez's father dragged one of the bags to the side of where they were digging and poked at it with a piece of rebar. He discovered a skull in the bag as well as other bones. The men stopped digging and called the police. San Marino police officer Joe Lucero responded to the Lorraine Road property and observed human remains in bags scattered near this container. Mr. Perez has dug hundreds of pools in the San Marino area. He estimated that using a shovel and a pickaxe, it would have taken him around 7 hours to dig a hole big enough and deep enough to accommodate the fiberglass container. The remains were in the same area where Ms. Farrar had noticed disturbed earth back in 1985. There were no pipes or plumbing in this area of the property. The area where the remains were found was not visible from the front of the house. The guest house blocked the view of this area of the yard. Physical anthropologist Judith Day examined the excavation area. She designated Site A as the area where the bag containing the skull was located. Site B was a fiberglass drum. Inside the drum was the lower half of a human body in jeans. A pair of shoes was found underneath the drum. The area to the left of the drum was designated as Site C and included plastic bags containing a human torso covered in a shirt. Ms. Day collected evidence and transported it to the Los Angeles coroner's office. Senior criminalist Manuel Munoz with the coroner's office separated the physical evidence from the human remains. The Site A evidence included 2 plastic bags, one inside the other, that contained skull fragments and a column of hair. The Site B evidence included the fiberglass container, which held a pair of jeans wrapped in cellophane with bones within the jeans. There were also a pair of socks and a pair of shoes wrapped in plastic. Site C evidence included 2 plastic bags, each containing a hand. A shirt containing an arm and torso bones was wrapped in plastic. Forensic scientist Lynn Harold with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department determined that the fiberglass drum was buried 3 feet from the surface of the ground. The Site A bags included a University Bookstore at Milwaukee, Wisconsin bag, which was the type of bag used at the bookstore at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee from 1979 to 1982. The second bag was a Trojan Bookstore USC bag, which was the same design as the bags used by the USC bookstore from 1979 to 1984. So by the way, dreamers, I believe in the episode I said that they found a University of Wisconsin and USC sweatshirt buried with the evidence. I can't recall where I got that information from. It might have been from the Vanity Fair article, or it could have been the other podcast on this case. But it appears that that's a mistake. They were shopping bags, not sweaters. And this is what would ultimately link Christian to the human remains because he attended both the Wisconsin school and he pretended to attend USC. Ms. Harold examined the shirt found with the remains. The long-sleeve shirt had at least 6 one-inch cuts caused by a knife or a box cutter. There were 4 cuts on the back of the left shoulder, and the other 2 were on the back of the left sleeve near the elbow. Ms. Harold believed the cuts were either inflicted from behind or from the front if the victim's arm had been raised. The cuts existed before the body decomposed and were not caused by roots, the bobcat, or any mishandling of the remains. Ms. Harold also examined the guest house at the Lorraine Road property for the presence of blood. She lifted the carpet and padding in the main living room and did not see blood. When she used luminol and later used the Kastle-Meyer test, she confirmed the presence of 4 large blood stains on the slab floor. 3 of the stains had wiping marks, which would occur when someone dilutes or wipes away wet blood. The evidence was consistent with someone attempting to clean up the blood. DNA testing was not feasible, so no samples were collected. The parties stipulated that the remains belonged to John Soes. The parties also stipulated that Dr. Robert Mann, a forensic anthropologist, reconstructed the skull fragments, and determined that the skull fractures to the right parietal area and the front bone of the skull were caused by severe blunt force trauma. The parietal damage was inflicted before the frontal damage, and each blow was inflicted at or before the moment of John So's death. Forensic pathologist Dr. Frank Sheridan reviewed the coroner's findings and also examined the skull. He found 2 fractures near the forehead area of the skull and extensive fracturing near the right parietal area caused by at least 2 impacts to the area. All of the fractures were inflicted at or about the time of death and were inflicted with a blunt object with major force. Any of the blows would have incapacitated Mr. So's or rendered him unconscious and would have caused external and internal bleeding. Mr. So's died of blunt force trauma to the head. In February of 1993, Christian met Sandra Boss at a party in New York City and introduced himself as Clark Rockefeller. Ms. Boss was studying for an MBA at Harvard Business School, and the two maintained a long-distance romantic relationship over the next year and a half. According to Ms. Boss, Christian always wore hats in public and explained that he had a high need for privacy because of his famous family. Christian also told Ms. Boss that he was involved in secretive government work, doing third world debt renegotiations. Christian also represented that he had started a company focused on space travel and military projects, and that he had special expertise in satellites. Christian proposed to Ms. Boss in 1994. She accepted and moved into his New York City apartment, which Christian told her he was subletting from Ms. Minabe. Ms. Boss started working at a management consulting firm. Christian went to great lengths to protect his privacy, including using credit cards from Ms. Boss's accounts, as he had done during his relationship with Ms. Minabe. In October of 1995, Christian and Ms. Boss were married at a Quaker meeting house in Massachusetts. Christian represented that he had taken care of all the paperwork to make the marriage legal. In fact, however, he did not. Ms. Boss supported the couple financially during their marriage, but Christian controlled their money. Leases and titles to the couple's properties were always in Ms. Boss's name. Once airlines started requiring identification from passengers, Christian never flew again. He also refused to stop in Connecticut on car trips between Boston and New York. Remember, dreamers, he got spooked in Connecticut when John Sousa's truck was traced by law enforcement there, at which point Christian went off the grid for those 4 years. The couple had a daughter in May of 2001. During this time, Christian introduced himself to others as Clark Rockefeller and said that he owned a propulsion physics laboratory in Canada and that his company had built a satellite. Ms. Boss was unhappy in the relationship because Christian did not work and was generally unpleasant. In 2004, she told Christian that she wanted to leave him. He threatened that she would never see their daughter again if she left. Ms. Boss finally left Christian in 2007, initiated divorce proceedings, and obtained custody of their daughter. In August of 2007, Ms. Boss discovered that Clark Rockefeller was not his real name. At the time, the couple were living in Boston, Massachusetts. On August 2, 2008, Christian was taken into custody in Baltimore, Maryland for kidnapping his daughter. He was transported to Boston, Massachusetts, where he was formally arrested. At the time of his arrest, he was using the name Chip Smith. After his arrest, Christian told Massachusetts authority that his name was Clark Rockefeller. His true identity was discovered based on his fingerprints. Christian's arrest drew media attention. On August 26, 2008, he granted an interview to Natalie Morales for the Today Show. He told Ms. Morales that he believed his real name was Clark Rockefeller. He said he had a few childhood memories of growing up in the United States, but did not have any clear memories of his parents. He was quite sure that he grew up in New York City. He denied that his name was Christian Gerhartsreiter, and he denied having any connection to Germany. He admitted to using the name Christopher Crowe while working on Wall Street. When he was asked if he killed John and Linda, Christian responded, "My entire life, I've always been a pacifist. I'm a Quaker, and I believe in nonviolence. I can fairly certainly say that I have never hurt anyone physically." After Christian's true identity was discovered, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened its investigation into John and Linda Soes. The Sheriff's Department conducted an extensive search of all available law enforcement and public databases to locate John and Linda, such as arrests, convictions, driver's licenses or identification cards, updated addresses or contact information for both of them since 1985. There were no customs records showing that they entered or left the United States from January 1st, 1985 until the time of the trial, or that they ever applied or received any passports. The Sheriff's Department executed a search warrant at a storage facility in Baltimore. The storage unit contained a number of letters, bills, credit cards, and checkbooks bearing the name of Clark Rockefeller. There were also 22 unused postcards preserved in plastic sleeves from various destinations. The Sheriff's Department also obtained Christian's German passport. The passport did not have any record of him traveling internationally after entering the United States on his student visa in 1978. As for Christian's defense, his attorneys called to the stand two forensic document examiners who opined that the postcards sent to Linda's friend, Miss Kaufman, Linda's mother, and Linda's employer were actually written by Linda herself. That was the only evidence listed in Christian's appellate documents. While the appellate court ruled that Christian's time served credits were not properly calculated and that they changed the enhancement of 2 deadly weapons to 1, the first-degree murder conviction was affirmed. Christian Gerhartsreiter would remain convicted of first-degree murder, and Linda Soe's whereabouts continued to remain a mystery to this day, some 36 years later. And thank you, dreamers. That will be all for Christian Gerhartsreiter. Until next time, sweet dreams. And let's cross our fingers that we don't have to say the name Gerhartsreiter or Chichester anymore. Thank you.